What if the factors that fuel human trafficking aren't just forces out there, but right here, shaping the world we live in every day? Here, we take an unflinching look at how cultural influence, hidden pain, and exploitative systems contribute to the demand for commercial sex. This isn't just another awareness podcast about a social issue. It's about people, the human stories of those harmed, those healing, and those waking up to their role in change. Welcome to the Demand Disruption Podcast.
Okay, welcome to the next episode of the Demand Disruption Podcast. We're just so excited to be here today and just have this moment to talk about who we are in this work in human trafficking awareness, advocates for survivor leaders, and also uniquely our work in fighting the demand for human trafficking. And really, we just want to frame this conversation today as, this space where we're able to talk and share about our experiences. And I feel like people are looking through these times at places where they can feel seen, where they can feel heard. And so we just invite you here today to be able to just feel that, feel seen, feel heard. So I just want to start off, Joe. We're talking as two human trafficking experts. We've been in this work for, over a decade, both you and I. And I think there's this kind of mindset that we have when we think about what are we fighting for versus what are we fighting against. Yeah. And so, when you hear that, what are your thoughts with that?
First thing, I love the delineation. There's a difference there. I heard a quote before that said, the greatest threat to communication is the presumption that it's actually occurring. And by that, what I understood that was hearing, not only speaking, but hearing. And if you're not comfortable enough hearing what somebody is for and taking that in a way that doesn't threaten you and you can have a conversation about it, then your reaction's always going to be against. Against is a mindset that sounds like it stops things. Sometimes it does. Most of the time, it perpetuates it. What we're for. If we're for somebody living in freedom and independence from an unwanted sexual behavior, or we're for somebody making choices that are informed based on who's harmed and how they're harming themselves, that's very different than being against trafficking. It's not hard to be against trafficking.
Yeah.
It's being against buyers. I'm against the act of buying. The human being who's doing the buying, I'm for them. And I want that to change. And if that changes, then the people they're harming, that's for them also, because isn't that our goal? Is to stop trafficking and the victimization of other people. So I love the against and the for clarity, because sometimes words, we just get focused on it for the sake of being focused on it. This has meaning. What are we for? Let's live in what we're for and who that's for, and see what that can do for a change, instead of this against, I'm going to stop that, or I hate that, or I'm against that. There are a lot of things I'm against, but I've got to get back to that identity of why I'm for the alternative. And in doing so, work in some humanity in my conversation.
I think for someone who's, been in this work for a while, I want to say when we're fighting against something, it definitely is a lot harder and it takes a larger toll on you. Mm-hmm. When you think about fighting against trafficking, in that previous career I've had mentioned before, I used to be a case manager for teen victims. And so when you think about fighting against human trafficking, you're fighting against the systematic structures that are in place that, has contributed to this exploitation. And there's so many things that, we have to address for, the victims and those that are vulnerable to help them through getting through that life. I mean, you're talking the victims that I worked with, you're talking 17-year-olds that don't know how to read, at like a 5th grade reading level. You're talking about, unstable housing. Like, these are all things that as a movement and as one case manager, you can never address, right? Yeah. But when you're talking about fighting for something, you're fighting for this person to reclaim their identity. You're fighting for this person to, have the same dignity that every person deserves on this earth, right? You're fighting for just basic love, right? Like whatever that means, love in this kind of like parental sense of this child should have been brought up and raised in a way that, would have never led them to this place in the first place. Yeah. But also love in the neighbor sense, right? Like, it doesn't have to be a victim of trafficking. It doesn't even have to get to that point. Like, you can be a mentor. We've talked about mentoring before. You can be a mentor at a local high school or a local middle school. It's this fighting for aspect that I think in the end, it is so much more life-giving. Yeah. Yeah.
I'm listening to that, and I'm still thinking sometimes, but that's one person you're helping. And not that people are sitting there in this negative mindset. Yeah. Well, we can be negative because the stakes are so high. We want the result to be positive so badly that when it doesn't seem like it's earth-shattering or needle moving, that we just kind of go, but let's just play this out. You've got a young person that you're caring for as a case manager and working with a teen trafficking victim, and you're for them knowing their worth. Concurrently, I'm working with a 16-year-old boy who thinks that pornography is sex, and that is a representation of a relationship. It's all about what can I get. Mm-hmm. And so she's seeing her worth, and in that worth, she's also seeing from the case manager, somebody loves me unconditionally. There's a connection here. This boy I'm talking to, I'm trying to eliminate the reward-seeking behavior from the physical feeling of sex and connect them with what it would mean to have a connection with somebody intimately. Mm-hmm. That's a fulfilling thing, very different. And now you're still working with this girl so she can have some functional life decision-making processes that are healthy for her, for small decisions and then bigger decisions, like a relationship. And then I'm working with this person who understanding who they are, what they believe, and how they can defend that in and of themselves and be around people who they require that of them and they do that for them. Now they're getting back to their identity. And so that intersection is very different than what would happen if it wasn't happening. So that's one person and one person, but it's a repeatable, successful model. Mm-hmm. Now, if none of that happened, this person, reward-seeking behavior, this person, this is all you're good for, and somebody exploiting them, their intersection is going to look very, very different. That is what being for something can do. Being against that intersection didn't stop it. It's just us standing there recognizing there's something very, very wrong with it. But if we don't say there's something very, very wrong with the contributing factors, then it's going to happen, and we can't change that. So, as I think about this and I think about the humanity piece of it, we keep saying certain words, but what I love about these conversations is it always does come back to that human factor. What's influencing us? Is it in agreement with the things that we believed when we were at our best, who we are, what's right? And if it's not, where do we go to help resolve that conflict? And if we do resolve that conflict, what could be gained? And if we get that freedom that could be gained, what will my life look like then? That's being for somebody doing better. In social work, we talk about social justice and other things. There is a capabilities mindset instead of a negative mindset. Oh, this family situation is messed up. I went in, the stove was on, there's kids over here unattended, the diapers are a mess, this and that. Instead of seeing what's happening here, this family's doing the best they can. Mom left the kids. Oh, the kids are unattended. Yeah, that's terrible. But mom left the kids unattended because she was paying the rent down at the whatever, and she didn't have any help. I should be looking for her doing what she should do to retain a home for these kids and themselves to have safety. And then ask, why did she have to leave them unattended? Where was the support help? Let me get support help. A positivity mindset is for something happening. Mm-hmm. A negative mindset is, CPS need to take these kids unattended. It doesn't consider the human condition. And we're all functioning within the human condition. Most of us have a privilege to not have to worry about the extremes of the human condition. And so trafficking is very much the same thing. If I can get with a guy and work with them in something that is causing not only harm to him and others, that's being for the change in his life that will have a ripple effect into others.
I love that. I think that ripple effect is something that we've been kind of thinking as like a theme of not only like our podcast, but in our programs, in our work, things that we advocate in our line of work. Because I think there's something about it too, where it's not as, easy and straightforward sometimes as we make it sound to me. Like, yes, please do go to your local high school and mentor. Yes. But it's also, when you're thinking about fighting for, it takes a little bit of that time, that first impact for things to build on and for you eventually to see change. Because I remember, when I started anti-trafficking work, I was like 19. I was a sophomore in college. And, I was just in my mind really like justice oriented. Mm-hmm. I was on a political science track. And so like I cared a lot about like social justice issues. And, our campus, we talked about, a cause that we wanted to support. So a bunch of my friends and I, we put like caution tape on our bodies.
Yeah, I remember you telling the story.
Yes. we put like caution tape on our bodies so that we could like be a talking point, for people to start conversations. And I thought that was like, yes, like I am fighting trafficking. But then, when I went into like actual like case management work, there was some of that, but not as much. It was a lot of sitting in McDonald's and having ice cream with one of my clients. It was connection. And it takes time because, very early when you start, they don't want to hear it. I remember the first group session I led, and I remember just leaving completely devastated. But the director that I was working for at the time, she told me, it's not about you changing, whatever you're going to say on, our group sessions that we have, one day out of the week is not going to be earth shattering to them, but it's you showing up every single week, building that consistency, you just planting that seed for them. Mm-hmm. And she told me, it's like, I'm going to be honest. You might not ever see the fruits of that seed, growing, but the fact that you planted that's important. And I think
that was a gift that director gave you. Yeah, that was a gift what she told you, because that's a lot to carry.
It is. It is. And I think for people, if you're listening to this and you feel, like you want to, contribute to this cause or any cause, right? You want to, add hope, add change, add peace into the world, but you're scared to, I say, like, it's not that continuing act. It's important, right, to show up, but really, like, we need people to just plant the seeds. Yeah. The more seeds we can plant, I think the better we'll see, our society, our culture can be, in the next 5 years, the next 10 years.
That's really where the demand work. I mean, we say planting seeds and waiting and not getting to see fruit. Mm-hmm. I just think about demand disruption in this whole process. Very early on, I was justice-minded as well. I also felt like I was built for a certain part of this work, kick in a door and save somebody, let's go. Like, I had a very inaccurate, I had no understanding. I had awareness that trafficking was happening, and I could do something about it. Yeah, if it gets rough, whatever, no big deal. Like, that was a selective ignorance because I didn't want to know all the details. I just wanted to do this thing. That's awareness, and we talk often in our org about the difference between awareness and understanding. Once you understand what it is, what the fight is, that survivor voices aren't just things we invite to our fundraisers, that we collaborate with them and learn from them and go, whoa, tell me that again, because I always thought that you wanted this or a survivor wants this. Be wrong as often as possible when listening to somebody with lived experience, because that means you're hearing a difference, a gap between what you thought and what they lived. And what you thought is not going to stand against what somebody lived. You've got to take from that so that you can help understand and shape the way we have our conversations. But bringing it back to demand, you very rarely get to see it, get to see the end result. Like we have our program, our bridge method is, there's a reason why we pair accountability partners, our defenders, with men who've been arrested for solicitation of prostitution. And we pair them for months. And we work through those steps and stages. Because if you don't do that, there is no behavioral modification because the behavior is rooted in the belief. And if you're not doing these step-by-step things that are resource-based that can go on for the rest of their lives, then their healing will not go on the rest of their lives. Their acting out behaviors will change. And it's true on a small level, too. So as we talk about our work, we have to remember that it is being for something, empowering, reminding people what they're capable of and what they're worth, and doing that repeatedly. Repeat. It's not magic. It's not easy, but it is how people see progression and transformation.
So, when we talk about fighting the demand, and we're talking about fighting for something, and we're fighting for restoration, we're fighting for healing, for freedom, but then we're also fighting for, people to show up, especially in the lives of young men and young women. As an organization that focuses on the demand, talking about, the culture, what does it mean for a young boy to grow up and to be a man in today's culture? I just kind of want to ask you, kind of walking back towards, 2018 when Love People Not Pixels and demand disruption kind of became a thing. What was that like? Being one of the first to start this movement of fighting for this aspect of, anti-trafficking work?
Yeah, that's a good question. Because you picked the right year. For a second there, I was going to correct you, but you picked the right year. Because 2016, end of 2015, 2016 is when Bo, who founded Love People Not Pixels, through his own healing and restoration, began the work. But when I started working with him in 2017, we really started to kind of consider in 2018, okay, what's this look like? How does the two, right, pornography and that type of influence in your life and trafficking, how do the two work together and how are they related? And I kept coming back to the same thing. They're not mutually exclusive, but there's a belief that there is. We had to acclimate to understanding in culture what the gaps were, what the understanding was. Again, not awareness, but understanding. Yeah. We, to this day, September 18th, 2025, are still explaining to people why pornography is dangerous. And we've got to do it in a health mindset, not a morality discussion. Now, morally, I have seen awful things that I absolutely detest related to pornography. But understanding from a health perspective, that helps other people realize, this isn't a judgment conversation. This is a wellness conversation. This is a humanity and a health conversation. So accepting those things and being for somebody knowing this is why this is happening versus against this monster, this thing, was a transformational mindset for us. And we had to employ that with everything we did. And we're still trying to do it. Sometimes I just get fired up and I do, and I want to just break something. That's usually more for me than it is for the cause. And that kind of selfish mindset is, that's not very constructive. So when we started developing our programs, it was for knowing what your worth is. It was for knowing what the dangers of pornography are, because it's not in line with what you really should be experiencing as a person in terms of love, intimacy, connection, and something that is life-giving instead of people using. That was pretty fundamental, and then we just kind of tried to apply that as we've gone through that empathy and vulnerability. But then what are we for, and how do we get people to understand that? It is a challenge, though. You talk about demand, talk about buyers. People are like, that's great that y'all are working with them. But they're not necessarily reaching for their wallets. They're not necessarily saying, how do I help with that? Because it does feel like somebody should do that. When we explain why we're doing it and what it's for, that's a lot more engaging.
So our organization, our tagline is love, disrupt, defend. And I love I love all the words because I used to be an English teacher.
All the words.
But the word that I kind of connected with a lot was defend, because it's like an action word, right? And actually, two of, the words in our tagline is really, for something. Yeah. So maybe you can help break it down a little bit. Like, what does that mean in our tagline? And what does it mean when we're talking about fighting for something?
Some people have heard this story. When we changed our name from Love People, Not Pixels, we actually asked our followers, our volunteers, here's some options. Here's some ideas. There were like 12 names. And Demand Disruption was one that I wanted. But I liked Love, Disrupt, Defend, and two others. Well, they finished in that order. Demand Disruption and then Love, Disrupt, Defend as an org name. And what I've always carried with me was that people doing the work recognized those 4 words. Our volunteers are the ones who helped pick the name. And here they are saying, Love, Disrupt, Defend. I like that. And so we kept that as our tagline, and it was exactly for that reason. It was because we have to be for that. We have to be for loving others, even through their struggle and brokenness. We have to be for disrupting systems of harm, systems that exist every day in just about everything that we deal with to some degree. And then I would really even say all 3 or 4. We have to be for defending one another in truth and love. Whenever we do our slides, one pops up and it says defend, and it's a verb. And I think you wrote it, somebody did, and it says defend each other in truth and love. That's being for somebody, and that's where Love, Disrupt, Defend comes from.
I think for me, it's this when we think about defend and love, it's this aspect of like protecting like what you value, protecting what is special and like important to you. Yeah. Like, is there anything in your history of working with these buyers that you've seen this come up?
Yeah, you asked that question and a name came directly to mind. So I'm seeing that we do exit interviews with the guys. The exit interview is you're done with your program, you've gone through all the steps, you've gone through the requirements of a support group, you've gone through requirements of professional therapy, you've gone through the requirements of education and information learning, and meeting with your defender. These are all requirements. And the exit interviews, you've earned the right to tell me why I should now send a letter to the DA's office and say, this person's done the work. In that interview, we talk about a lot of things. And so I kind of go down my list of things that I think are important. And so I asked this one guy a question. And he said, before I answer that, you got to understand something, Joe. Here's the value of your program. I'm like, oh, you're going to tell me the value of my program? Our program. Go ahead. Tell us, please. But what he said next has always stayed with me. And it was that his defender, Eric, who is awesome and supports our org in so many ways, he said, if Eric would have said to me, hey, I don't believe in what you're doing. I don't believe in you buying sex. I don't believe in that. That's harming people. And so the work we're going to do together is going to make sure you never do that again. Like, that's not a horrible thing to say to somebody because it's true.
Yeah.
But that's not what Eric said.
Right.
Eric said, part of a requirement of being a volunteer with Demand Disruption is that we have to get in touch with the training of our own empathy and understanding what this is like for somebody else and where in our lives we've got things that we weren't proud of that we wanted to change. And he said that right there was the difference between me going through a program and checking all the boxes, because I could have done all of that and I would have been very believable. There's a difference between that and change, personal change. We were for him as a human being getting over this and never doing it again, yes, but never doing it again because it was in conflict with his beliefs and values. And Eric facilitated that through showing up every week, not unlike a mentor, right? Mm-hmm. Through showing value to this person that wasn't conditional, and also not being that person's judge and jury. Because what we don't realize until we think about ourselves, often people are their worst judge and jury, what they're telling themselves. And when somebody comes out against them, it just confirms that that's hopeless. I mean, we don't get anywhere that way. We will never win that. We won't win an argument with a person that we should be discussing something with. We won't understand a kid's perspective who's 15 years old, walking around with the entire world in their pocket when we didn't grow up that way.
Yeah.
Like we've got to be able to bridge that gap. And that's really what, when you ask me that question, I think that's representative of so many conversations we've had.
I think this aspect of having conversation and fighting for something, and also just hearing this former buyer's words and how he received that love. Like he received those words that felt hopeful and was able to, make change for him. I think that's so key. And I think that just goes back to why our program works. And I want to kind of build on this illustration almost of like the thermostat versus the thermometer, because one is reactive to temperature and the other, you're setting the temperature.
I love it.
And I think for us, we're wanting to, be leaders in this space where we can set the temperature, where we can, speak hope, love, healing, forgiveness, restoration into societies, cultures, and communities that are desperately needing to hear this. And I think for you, from my perspective, like seeing you do this work, as a father, as a husband, as, someone who's a leader in their community, like how has that felt to carry that weight?
I very much had to learn that in my life. I was doing a training for a church this last weekend, and one of the things I told them is that I had to understand what manhood was, because growing up, I didn't understand it.
Yeah.
I didn't understand it, and I would take shortcuts that I thought were strength, because I was always usually bigger than somebody. I was more willing to fight than that person. I could be louder, I could intimidate them, and then I'd get my way, and then I would win, and it was all about winning. Realizing later that is the weakest version of manhood. It's barely manhood. It's boyhood. You're just a taller boy.
Yeah.
Because you're reacting. You are the thermostat. And you're doing it in a way where you almost have no control because you haven't put any discipline in it. People hate the word discipline. But I've come to say one of my revelations was discipline is the most direct way to freedom. If you have some discipline, in other words, you understand yourself, you understand your relationship with others, you can set the temperature in the room. You can change that. And when you change that, you're changing the people in that room. And you can continually do that over and over. But you can also see it in others when they're not there and they can't do that.
Yeah.
They're the thermostat. They're the thermometer.
Yeah.
And then you can give grace because they're just not there. They don't know how to do that. But man, there's nothing cooler than working with somebody, having a relationship, and them at some point realizing for themselves that they do have control over how they act, how they interact, how they treat others. And they're not taking shortcuts. One of the most rewarding things for me is to stand in a room talking to people about anti-trafficking work or any of this stuff that we do, and there are more than a fourth of the room are men. Like, just give me 25%, and I'm thrilled, because we have got to confront what being a man is in our culture, the way that it's constantly presented to us. So I think all that comes back around to how it feels to do this work and then see somebody really invest and risk enough of seeing faults in themselves that they want to change. And when they do that, it gives me belief that we can win this fight. But we can. We're for that person. That person is for change. They understand who they were or what they believe and get back to who they are. As an exercise that we do toward the end, I usually do it as a couple times for kind of a mile marker. Where are we with this guy, right? I tell him, piece of paper, pen, draw a line down the middle. On the left side, I want you to describe him. And on the right side, I want you to describe you right now. And sometimes I explain it, sometimes I don't. I want them to describe the guy who was buying sex regularly, who was justifying it, who was in a consumption mindset, who objectified human beings into something that allowed them to seek what they thought they wanted in this reward-seeking behavior that harmed so many. I want you to describe that person. And then I want you to describe where you are right now. And what I'm looking for is the delta. Where's the gap? Where's the good gap? How do we get from here to there? Where else do we have to go? Because that's the next thing they're going to write down is, what do you want to be? They've got to see it. They've got to look ahead. And when they do that, they're for change, they're for growth, instead of this self-loathing for what they did, being against themselves. I mean, a house divided cannot stand, right? You can't be against yourself. There's got to be something for it. And if we can do that with guys, if we can do that with a kid, if we can do that with a teen trafficking victim like you used to work with, and be for them being valued and loved, and let them know that, man. I've got kids, right? So I think back to Monsters, Inc. This is a very technical and scientific comparison, so stay with me.
Yes.
Being against the kids to scare them, to create all this energy when they screamed, right? Yes. You're smiling because you're picturing it. You got this canister, you come out with one can, okay. But being for those kids to make them laugh, like canister. How can we be for somebody and see this exponential change versus being against them and maybe changing something in that moment and not really being able to grow up past that? I
love what you said about that, like realizing, using your wonderful illustration, but just seeing how that turn, from like scaring kids to making them laugh. And I think too about like being a woman in this work, coming from a survivor care organization to talking about demand, it is difficult because, you're talking about an issue that society and culture predominantly says is a male issue. But truly, for me, it's to sound the alarm and tell communities and parents and people out there that this is affecting so much more than our young men. And yes, like our young men probably are the most vulnerable to this, but our kids are. And I think there's something about it too where, being able to have those spaces to educate parents, but also have spaces to educate the kids, because I think that's a part of, building the world that we want to live in, is being able to have our kids, grow up being raised in a way where they care about their fellow classmates, where they care about who they're going to date, when they care about, what's important to them, and keeping to that and not letting, the porn industry, the commercial industry, define them of what they should be instead, right?
Yeah.
So that's kind of the weight for me being in this work. And I think like, truly the fight for human trafficking, against human trafficking, and for people, I think our youth is going to make like a huge impact in that.
I believe that. I mean, I have to, because everything we're doing right now is reactive. Mm-hmm. But when we can pour into a young person their worth and value and how not to stand for the indignity of how people are treated, that is proactive. And that's where we have to get. That's where the change will be made. But, man, I'm thinking about this. I'm 52, so I qualify as the old guy saying, this generation, man, these kids, what somebody should be saying if you say that is, who raised them? They didn't raise themselves. If you're going to surrender to culture's influence, then you're not parenting anymore. You just got room. You're just paying room and board for somebody until they've got to get out. Like, don't ever surrender to that. As people who, you're not raising kids, you're raising adults. If you've never heard that expression, get used to it, because you're raising adults so that when they go out, they're not just self-sufficient. They're proficient in helping other people and being in life with other people. And that's what being for something can do. It's a total game changer, because if we are worried so much about our culture being an influence on our kids or young people, that should just be a reminder of how important it is to have real conversation.
Right.
Not surrender. Never give up. People love to say don't quit, whatever. The most important thing you can do is to get down in the trenches with somebody you love and care about, and do so in a way where victory's not guaranteed, but you're going to fight until there's no fight left. And that's what it looks like to be for something. It takes a hell of a lot more courage to be for something to be against it.
I love like what you touched on, and I think it kind of goes into like a good place for us to land, because, in this ideal kind of world, right? Where, we're building the world that we want to live in. Like, what does it mean? Like, what does it mean for the people that are listening, for audience members, for the single moms and single dads that are listening to this that are feeling hopeless, for the college student that, is seeing all of this advertisement and media around that's telling them like who they should be, for the young man that, unfortunately, is suffering right now with an addiction to pornography and wanting to break free from it. What does it mean for people, for us to be people and in this society, in this culture, contributing to like families and communities, living in a safe, in a dignified world? Like, what does that even look like? Because it seems impossible. But I hope what you're going to say and what we've expressed throughout this episode, that it's actually a lot more approachable than we realize.
Have you ever been in a conversation with somebody, and maybe you're holding back a little bit because you don't know them completely, or whatever the circumstance is, but then they say something, and it's positive, it's affirming, it's good, and you think, I wish I'd have said that. Why didn't I say that? I was thinking that. You didn't say it because for some reason, we've gotten into the societal norm of our interactions are guarded and careful and in this lane. But then somebody says something like that. Mm-hmm. So what does it look like? I think it looks like that. I think it looks like cutting through everything that's conditional, that puts you in a box, puts you in a place, says that this is when you should say that, when you shouldn't say that, and lead with that truth and love. Back to defending, right? Mm-hmm. Defend that relationship, that conversation. Because when people say things like that, man, it's refreshing. Because you ever go a whole conversation, talk to somebody for 30 minutes, walk away and be like, what do we even talk about? Like, what do I even take from that? And nothing, right? But then you talk to somebody for 5 minutes and you want more. That's because that person was real. That person was able to overcome and get outside of these boxes and expectations. I love being surprised by people's hope and optimism.
Yeah.
It is inspiring. I absolutely love that.
Where do you think that kind of the average person can kind of pull that from?
You can pull it from, so there's a Greek term, oikos. Mm-hmm. It's not the yogurt. Because I'm probably saying it wrong. If it is the yogurt, then digression. There are these circles. There's a little one. There's one a little bit bigger. There's one even bigger. Mm. This one out here is acquaintances, people you work with maybe. Now zoom in a little bit, get a little closer to the core, to the center, to the heart. That's your friends. That's your friend group. You have choices there, right? For some, it's your family. So some of your family's out here. I mean, that's a whole different show. But as we get closer down to that middle, the middle is your core. That's your people. That's who you've chosen. That's who you've seen value in, invested in, received return on investment. I think that's the way to do it, is to try to make investments. Because when you're investing in something and someone and it's real, you have something you might lose. They may not reciprocate. Mm-hmm. But why do we invest? For gain. We invest for this growth in what we had and something becoming more than what it was. That is the power of it. So as a human being, if I'm doing inventory on my relationships, and I'm thinking, where am I investing? Who am I investing with and in? Don't discard people. Just judge whether or not you're doing your part in investing. And if you are not getting a return, that's okay to put them out here. It's okay to help them move when it's time to move, or whatever. Like, that's probably more like this for most people. I should have another example. But do that inventory, because you're going to find you can't fit that many people in the tiny core. And the truth is, you don't need to. And then outside of that, friendships, try to draw people into that. And if you can't, that's okay too. You only need 2 or 3 in the core maybe, but have that mindset. These are all my people. And as I get closer to the heart and the center of it, I invest more. And constantly be thinking about that, because the investment you're giving is causing other people to create their core. And you're in that now. And you have that community. And community is the solution for so many things.
I love that. I think it goes back to that ripple effect that we were talking about. I think for me, it's, having seen and heard many stories and testimonies throughout my career, I think it's important to find hope in the smallest of things. Because if you can't find hope in the smallest of things, you can't see hope that's, grand, that is very obvious to the eye, right? And I think it's about like celebrating like those little victories, like if your teenage daughter, all of a sudden is like, hey mom, like I want to go on like a nail date with you. Like that's a big deal.
Yeah.
That's something to celebrate. It might seem very mundane, but as someone who's, worked with many, teenage girls that would have loved to have a nail date with her mom, like celebrate that, for like the young man, that's struggling, and they set the goal to, not indulge, in that, behavior, and they got through a day, like celebrate that day, because that's a day that you fought hard for.
Yeah.
And so I think that's kind of for me, like in this work, when I think about, the people that have been vulnerable with us, that have shared with us, teen trafficking victims and former buyers alike, and they're able to share with us what they've been through, what's happened to them, what they've done, what they want to hope and accomplish.
Yeah.
That's just incredible. And so, for anyone that's listening out there, like you can be an instrument of hope, whether it's a triangle or whether it's a big tuba, like you can be an incredible instrument of hope.
Yeah.
So just show up.
Yeah, show up. Exactly. It's kind of like The Matrix, the movie. You make a choice, red pill, blue pill, right? Mm-hmm. In the movie, everything that was life was simulated. Well, it makes me think of my smartphone. It's all simulating life, simulates relationships, simulates connections, but it distills the things that keep me assuming that all of this is truth. And it's just not. It can be a conduit. It can be a portion. This is not a guilt trip for using your smartphone, but it is not the truth. Connection, people, purpose, integrity, identity, those are real things. You can't simulate them. And there's no reward like it whenever you have a sincere connection with somebody. And that's hope, man.
That's hope. I think it's a great place to end. Thank you, everyone, for listening to another episode of the Demand Disruption Podcast. Please make sure to subscribe to our channels, follow us on all the social medias. We are on there. And if there are just ways that, we can just show up for our everyday, people in our communities, don't hesitate. Just do it.
Yeah.